If you can't talk about cake on your birthday, when can you talk about it? Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today, as it is my birthday, I am taking the cake book tag. I have seen this around the book internet a couple of times. I've seen it as a tag on book blogs, I have seen it as a tag on booktube, but I thought that today being my birthday was the best time for me to take this. Starting with question one is Chocolate Cake, a dark book that you absolutely love. And I don't necessarily know if love is the right word that I want to go for this, but it left a huge impact on me. And it's a book that I think about still time and time again, about 2 or so years after I actually read it. I was so heavily impacted by My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is the story of Vanessa, who, when she was about 15 and in boarding school, had a relationship with one of her English teachers. About 15 years later, some other allegations are coming out about Mr. Staines, about how he had been in other relationships with other underage women. And a lot of them are talking about how they felt exploited by him. And Vanessa doesn't share with any of this. She feels like their relationship was about nothing but love and respect for one another, and she is completely taking herself out of the narrative of what is actually happening now. There isn't a person among us who hasn't had a crush on a teacher at some stage, and we've all dreamt about what would happen and we've all wondered, but this book really does take it to another level. I really enjoyed reading this book, if enjoyed is the word you want to use about it. It's a book that's really heavy, and it's a book that I don't know if I would be able to go back and read it again, but I'm really glad that I did read it that first time. Next up is Vanilla Cake, a light read, and I have gone with People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is one of my favourite Emily Henry books, and it is about Alex and Poppy, who were best friends when they were younger and in college. But about 2 years before the beginning of this book, they had a huge falling out with one another and haven't spoken to each other since. Alex is a teacher and Poppy is a travel writer, and she's been sent on assignment to go to California and to basically do a couple of reviews for some hotels around there. She decides that she's going to invite Alex to come along with her. And this works out pretty well because his brother is actually getting married in California at the same time. So they decide to give their friendship one last try. But while they are together and while everything starts to fall into place, they start to remember what had happened 2 years previously and how they had never really resolved that. I absolutely love Emily Henry's writing. I've loved every single book of hers that I have read so far. This is definitely one of my favorites so far. I don't know if it is my favorite, but it does feel like one of the lighter ones that she's written so far. Next up is Red Velvet, a book that gave you mixed emotions. And first off, there are no mixed emotions when I see a red velvet cake. There is only joy and happiness when I see red velvet. It's one of my favorite flavors. But the book that I'm going to fit in here is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I went through almost every single emotion you can think about while I was reading this book. It starts off as you meet Eleanor. She is in her 30s and living in Glasgow, and her life is very regimented. Goes to work, doesn't really speak to anybody there, is very much a recluse, comes home, kind of hangs around her house for a little bit, goes into work the next day, does exactly the same thing. On Fridays, she goes to the corner shop nearby, buys a frozen pizza, 2 bottles of vodka, and that sees her through the weekend until she's back in the office on Monday. One day after work, she sees a man pass out on the street, and she and one of her co-workers are on the scene, so they help out the man. She gets to know her co-worker Raymond a little bit better, and he introduces her to some social activities that she had never performed in before. He takes her out places that she had never been, shows her a whole side of the world that she had never experienced, but she has to be home every single Wednesday for her 10-minute call with Mummy. As you go through the book, you start to realise that things are a lot darker than they initially seemed. That Eleanor's life is not as it initially appears, and that Mummy isn't exactly the person that you think that she is. As I said, I read this book and went through a whole scope of emotions. The main one that you go through, I would say, is secondhand embarrassment. There are so many situations that Eleanor puts herself in that you kind of look at it with your head in your hands and just think, oh my God, what is this woman going to do next? But then your heart really breaks for Eleanor in certain parts where she doesn't really understand the whole world around her, and she's doing what she thinks is right, but it's so heartbreakingly not the right thing to do that you just cannot help but cheer for her. And then there are parts of the story where life goes right and where things start to look up for Eleanor, and of course you start to get more on board with her story after that. Next up is Cheesecake, a book that you would recommend to absolutely everyone. And if you're looking to start out with romance, if you're looking to kind of build the heat up a little bit in the romances that you've been reading, go and check out the Brown Sister trilogy by Talia Hibbert. There are 3 different sisters in this series and they all feel like completely different people. None of them is just a carbon copy of one another. They all have very distinctive lives, very distinctive personalities, very distinctive things that are happening to them. The books are also chock full of representation. Chloe, who is the oldest sister, has fibromyalgia, so for a lot of the first book you get to see her dealing with a chronic illness. Danny is bisexual, and Eve, who is the youngest sister, is kind of figuring out if she is on the neurodivergent spectrum and is getting to know what independence and what earning her own money looks like. I absolutely love all 3 of these books. I absolutely love all 3 of these sisters. And if you're looking to start out with romance but you're not entirely sure where it is that you should go, it's definitely these ones. For Coffee Cake, a book that you've started but you've never finished, I have gone with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I tried this. I really did try it. It was about 2, 3, 4 years ago by this stage, but I picked up the Kindle sample of it because I thought it has, okay, it's a fantastical book, but it has got a historical fiction element to it. So I'm hoping that maybe that side of it is going to drag me in a little bit more. But there was just nothing about this story that I felt like I wanted to keep reading, and I wanted to keep diving into Addie's world. So I left it to the side. It's not probably a book that I'm going to ever go back to. It's not one that I'm going to pick up ever again. It is on the forever DNF list, but it is definitely a book that I have picked up and will not be going back to. For Carrot Cake, a book with great writing, I have gone with Beartown by Frederick Backman. This is a translation, and when the translation hits you so hard, you know that you are onto a winner here. This is about the inhabitants of Beartown, a small town in northern Sweden, which is hockey obsessed. Hockey is this people's religion, and the players on the hockey team are like gods. Everything starts to fall apart after a semi-final game when there is a party at one of the hockey players' houses and he sexually assaults one of the women who is at the party. Everything then turns into pointing fingers and pointing blame, and he said versus she said, and he was there and he wasn't there. And it's so impactful. It's so beautifully written for an act that is so horrific. My friend Margaret and I read this around the same time this month, and we were talking about it back and forth. And Margaret said to me at one point, I am almost incredulous that this was written by a man. It seems like Frederick Backman knows so well how to write something that is so painful and so torturous, but writes it so beautifully. And there are other phenomenal passages in this book. The first page alone stands out as being so striking. It's a book that I cannot forget about. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I've got the other 2 books in the series on my Kindle, and I absolutely do have to get to them at some stage, but I know that they are going to pack just as much of a punch as this one does. Tiramisu is a book that has left you wanting more, and I have gone with Candy by Kevin Brooks. This was one of my top tier books when I was about 15 or 16. It's about a young man named Joe. He's about 14 years old, and one day on the way back from a doctor's appointment, he meets a young woman named Candy. She's around the same age as him, but she looks like she's been through quite a lot. He and Candy get to know each other, and they talk while they're standing at the bus stop waiting for their buses to come, and he is enthralled by her. He finds out a little bit more about her over the course of the book, namely that she is a teenage prostitute who has had a really difficult life so far. She is addicted to heroin. She is pretty much under the thumb of her pimp. Joe decides that he is going to save Candy from the life that she has created, but things start to get a little bit more complicated as his world starts to open up. I absolutely loved this book when I was younger, and I'd really love to see a little bit more about it now. I'd love to see what happened to Joe and Candy after the events of this book. There was something so shocking at the end of it that I really just need to know where everything went after that. I'd love to see a sequel of it, maybe about 5 or so years afterwards, and just see what life looks like. For Cupcakes, a series with 4 or more books in it, I have gone with Watermelon by Marion Keyes. Marion is one of my favourite Irish writers of all time, and this series is so incredibly heartwarming and funny, and just like the Brown Sister trilogy, all 5 of the sisters in this series have a completely different personality. You've got Maggie, who is so type A, she is so uptight and so wound up that her sisters are continuously taking the piss out of her. You've got Rachel, who had a drug addiction as we met her, but now that she has turned her life around, you can see how much she loves her sisters, but also how much she relies on them for support. You've got Claire, who is the oldest sister and is very much the mother of the group, which is convenient because as we meet Claire, she has just given birth to her first daughter. All 5 of these books are hits for me. I have absolutely loved getting to know all 5 of the sisters. And now that the universe is starting to expand a little bit and we are getting follow-up books from Rachel and from Anna's stories, I have a feeling we're going to get to know the Walsh sisters a little bit more these days. Finally, Fruitcake is a book that you weren't anticipating, and I went into the Rachel incident by Caroline O'Donoghue with a completely different idea of what we were going to get. I went into it thinking that this was going to be about a torrid affair between a student and her teacher, and there was a torrid affair, and there was a teacher involved, but there was somebody completely different that I had never expected to see happen. There are also some really great discussions in this book about abortion and about the repeal referendum that happened in 2018 back in Ireland. And there is so much packed into the pages of this book that it completely blew me away. It was definitely not what I was expecting. I knew it was going to be a great read because Caroline is a fantastic author, but I don't think I was expecting just how much it was going to impact me. On my birthday, those are my answers to the cake book tag. What is your favorite cake flavor? If you would love to leave me a comment, but you can't think of anything you like to say, I would obviously love you to leave me a birthday themed emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.